I said people like you should be grateful just to be here. The words hit harder than the slap that followed. But that slap, it echoed. Not because of its sound, but because of its symbolism. It happened 38,000 feet above the ground, somewhere between Los Angeles and Chicago. In the front of the plane, tucked behind a polished curtain and overpriced champagne, a woman had just been assaulted in first class. Not by a fellow passenger. Not by some drunken businessman. But by a flight attendant. A flight attendant who didn't know that the woman she just slapped was not just a passenger, but the majority owner of the airline. That's not the beginning of a revenge story. It's the beginning of a black story that turns an entire corporation upside down. Her name was Ariana Monroe, 35. Tech prodigy turned venture capitalist. Founder of Helix Aviation Capital. A black woman with skin like polished mahogany, a sharp jawline, and eyes that didn't blink when the world tried to shrink her. To the outside world, she looked like another hoodie-wearing seat filler, until her cheek turned red, and the cabin fell into dead silence. That moment. That single second where a white flight attendant laid her hand on a black woman in first class, that's when the reckoning began. And here's the part they didn't see coming. Ariana didn't scream. She didn't cry. She didn't yell for a manager. She walked to the cabin phone, called one number, and said 5 words. Activate Protocol Skyfall. Now. What happened next wasn't just about punishment. It wasn't about public apologies or corporate spin. This was the quiet, surgical dismantling of a toxic culture, led by the very woman they underestimated. This is not just a headline. It's not just drama at 38,000 feet. This is a black story about power, perception, and the price of disrespect. And it starts with a slap. If this story has you hooked already, don't forget to hit like and stick around. Because what comes next? It's turbulence they never saw coming. If you were sitting in 2A or 3C that day, you probably wouldn't have noticed her. Ariana Monroe didn't walk onto Flight 227 like someone worth 9 figures. There was no entourage. No designer handbag. No noise. She wore a soft gray hoodie, fitted black slacks, and white sneakers so clean they looked brand new. Her natural hair was pulled into a tight bun, not for style, but for function. A quiet statement of control. She carried a single leather backpack and held a tablet close to her chest as she took her seat. 1A. Window. First class. To the untrained eye, she was nobody. Maybe a last-minute upgrade. A +1. Maybe someone who had cashed in frequent flyer miles from some tech job downtown. Grace Miller, the flight attendant, certainly thought so. But Ariana Monroe was the kind of woman who made tech giants nervous and venture capitalists lose sleep. She wrote her first piece of code when she was 11. Sold her first startup before she could legally rent a car. At 27, she exited her machine learning company, Nexacore, in a deal valued at $1.2 billion. And then, she vanished. No interviews. No keynotes. No LinkedIn updates. She walked away from the spotlight and built something quieter. Smarter. She became the lead architect behind Helix Aviation Capital, a private investment firm that acquired underperforming assets in the transportation sector. That included Skylane Air, a domestic airline on the edge of bankruptcy, known for its bad service and worse headlines. Ariana didn't just invest. She took majority control, silently. She kept her name off every document the public could see. Her voice was heard only by one man, William J. Carter, managing partner at Carter & Rowe LLP, and the legal face of her empire. She believed in transformation through truth. Real evaluation required immersion, not distance. That's why she boarded that flight anonymously. No press. No pre-boarding priority. Just a billionaire in a hoodie, observing the machine she owned from the inside. But what Ariana didn't anticipate was becoming a case study herself. Because sometimes, the system you're trying to fix, it sees you not as the owner, but as the problem. That day, Ariana wasn't flying for luxury. She was flying for data. And what she got was far more than metrics. Grace Miller had been flying for 16 years. She knew every trick passengers used to sneak oversized bags on board. She knew how to spot the nervous flyers, the difficult ones, the ones who demanded Dom Perignon like it came with the ticket. And she knew, or at least thought she did, how to read a cabin the moment she stepped inside. She didn't like surprises. And she especially didn't like what she saw in seat 1A. A young black woman, sitting quietly by the window, hoodie up, earbuds in. Not a pearl necklace. Not a power suit. No signs of pedigree. No signs of wealth. Something about it rubbed Grace the wrong way. She paused longer than she should have. Noticing. Calculating. There was no name on her internal list that matched what she saw in 1A. The name was Ariana Monroe. But no titles. No frequent flyer status. No notables. Note. Grace leaned toward her junior crew member, whispering just low enough to avoid being heard. "Keep an eye on 1A, she said, nodding subtly. "Might be a seat filler." The phrase, seat filler, was unofficial airline lingo for someone bumped up, given a comp ticket, or flying on someone else's status. In Grace's mind, seat 1A was supposed to be for CEOs in business suits, for old money and silver hair. She walked past Ariana twice more during boarding, checking her boarding pass again, outwardly polite, inwardly suspicious. Ariana, still reading on her tablet, noticed the subtle changes in tone, the slight over-explaining. The way Grace asked her to confirm her seat again even after she'd already done so. It was small. But Ariana had lived a life of small moments like these. Moments that, alone, could be dismissed. But stacked together over years. They built a wall. She didn't flinch. She didn't push back. She simply nodded and returned to her reading. But the seed was planted. Not by Ariana. By Grace. A seed of assumption, watered by bias. In Grace's mind, Ariana didn't belong in seat 1A. And worse, Grace was starting to believe it was her job to correct the imbalance. It's easy to ignore a glance. Harder to ignore when that glance turns into action. And this one was just getting started. The flight had leveled out at cruising altitude. The cabin lights dimmed, the hum of the engines settled into a steady rhythm, and drinks began to flow. Passengers reclined slightly, slipping into that in-between state, too tired to work, too alert to sleep. Ariana hadn't asked for much. She pressed the service button once, calmly. Grace arrived with a polished smile that never quite reached her eyes. "Yes?" she asked, her voice flat. Ariana removed one earbud. "Could I please have a warm towel? I think I missed the first round during takeoff." Grace paused. It was a simple request. One any other passenger would have gotten without hesitation. But Grace exhaled, a quiet, sharp breath of irritation, and turned on her heel without a word. She returned 3 minutes later, holding a towel with the kind of grip you'd use to hand over a parking ticket. "This time, try paying attention," she said under her breath. Ariana blinked. "Excuse me." The words weren't loud, but they carried weight. Grace didn't back down. "You've pressed that button 3 times. We have 30 other passengers up here." "That was my first request," Ariana replied, her voice controlled, but colder now. "And I believe your job is to provide service, not attitude." The words landed. A few heads nearby turned slightly, listening without trying to look like they were. Grace's face flushed red. Not just from anger, but from embarrassment. She had expected Ariana to shrink, to apologize. But Ariana wasn't built that way. Grace leaned forward. "You don't get to speak to me that way," she hissed. "Not on this flight." And then, she did it. Open palm. Across the cheek. A sound that cracked the silence like thunder on glass. Gasps. Audible and immediate. One man dropped his champagne flute. Another reached for his phone, his instincts faster than his disbelief. Ariana froze, her head tilted slightly from the impact. But her eyes, they didn't show pain. They showed calculation. Cold. Focused. Surgical. The kind of look a predator gives a weaker animal that just made a fatal move. She stood up. No yelling. No retaliation. Just one word. Noted. Then she turned and walked toward the front of the cabin. Toward the cockpit phone. Toward the end of Grace Miller's career. For a moment, no one moved. The cabin sat suspended in stunned silence, as if the plane itself had paused midair. Then the murmurs began, soft, disbelieving. Did that really just happen? Did she just hit her? Heads turned. Phones were raised, some discreetly, some not. A few passengers looked away, pretending not to have seen anything, hoping to avoid involvement. But the sound of that slap, it had reached every seat in first class. One woman, seated in 2D, began recording, her hand trembling slightly. Across the aisle, a man whispered, "This is going to go viral." At the galley, a young male flight attendant named Marcus had frozen mid-pour, his hand hovering above a glass of Chardonnay. His eyes locked with Ariana's as she passed. She wasn't crying. She wasn't flustered. She looked focused. Ariana walked with slow, deliberate steps. She reached the cabin phone near the cockpit and picked it up with the calm precision of someone who had practiced this move. Not on a plane, but in boardrooms where billions were on the table. She spoke only one sentence. "This is Ariana Monroe. Patch me through to William Carter." The cockpit door cracked open. The co-pilot, a soft-spoken man in his 40s, glanced out, saw Ariana at the phone, and froze. He didn't know who she was, but he knew authority when he saw it. Grace, meanwhile, stood by the service cart, her face a mixture of disbelief and panic. She had expected a scene, maybe yelling. She hadn't expected control. No threats. No demands. Just a call. She turned to Marcus. "She's trying to get me fired." Marcus didn't answer. He wasn't sure what to say. He had seen the slap. So had everyone else. Ariana hung up the phone and turned back to the cabin. Her gaze swept across the rows of shocked faces. Businessmen, executives, influencers, all now watching a woman they had misjudged step fully into focus. She didn't speak to them. She didn't need to. They had already seen enough. And from the look on her face, they hadn't seen anything yet. The line connected in under 5 seconds. No hold music. No assistant. Just a direct line. "William Carter." The voice on the other end answered, crisp and alert. "It's me," Ariana said calmly. "Protocol Skyfall." There was a pause, half a beat of silence as gravity settled into the voice of one of the most powerful attorneys on the East Coast. "Understood," Carter replied. No questions. No disbelief. Just action. Protocol Skyfall wasn't a press release or an internal memo. It was a nuclear button. A full-scale legal maneuver designed by Ariana and Carter for one purpose: to seize operational control of any asset Helix Aviation Capital owned in the event of gross misconduct or reputational threat. It had never been used before. Until now. "I want the executive chain of command suspended within the hour," Ariana said, her voice flat. "Notify the FAA that a high-level corporate officer has been physically assaulted in flight by uniformed staff." Use those exact words. "I'll start with the board," Carter replied, already moving. "Emergency Clause 9A will freeze all major decisions. HR, PR, and legal will be locked until they report directly to us." "Good," Ariana said. "And Grace Miller. We'll have her full file reviewed. If there's history, we'll find it. Do you want this escalated to the Civil Rights Division?" "Not yet," Ariana said, eyes fixed on the cabin like a general surveying the battlefield. "Let's handle this our way. Quiet. Precise." Behind her, the cabin was still murmuring. Grace was now visibly shaken. Marcus, the junior attendant, had stopped defending her. Other crew members kept their distance. "Copy that," Carter confirmed. "I'll have the internal communication drafted for all Skylane senior staff within 30 minutes. Emergency board meeting in 2 hours. You want to lead it?" "No," Ariana said, her voice like steel. "Let them sit in their confusion first." A soft chime echoed from the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, This is your captain. We'll begin our descent into Chicago shortly. Ariana hung up. The flight wasn't over. But Skylane Air, at least the version they thought they ran, was already gone. And by the time those wheels hit the tarmac, the sky they operated under would never look the same again. At that exact moment, on the 32nd floor of a glass tower in downtown Chicago, Charles Whitaker was deep into a lunch meeting with investors. He was the CEO of Skylane Air. Polished, well-spoken, a master of quarterly projections and industry jargon. And he had no idea his company was imploding above the clouds. Across the table, he was mid-sentence, boasting about the airline's latest uptick in customer satisfaction scores, when his executive assistant entered the room. Her face was pale. Her tablet clutched to her chest. "Charles," she said, almost breathless. "It's urgent." He raised a brow but kept smiling at the investors. "This'll just be a second," he said, stepping aside to take the tablet. One look at the screen, and the smile disappeared. A message from Helix Aviation Capital. Red flag header. Emergency Communication Protocol Skyfall activated. Under it, a legal directive from Carter & Rowe, LLP. Effective immediately, all executive authority at Skylane Air is frozen pending board review. Emergency Clause 9A has been triggered by majority shareholder Ariana Monroe. Charles blinked. Ariana Monroe? The name didn't register. Then he saw the attached flight report. Incident: alleged physical assault on Ariana Monroe by Skylane crew member Grace Miller. The color drained from his face. He turned back to his assistant. "Is this real?" She nodded. "Flight 227. Just landed. Passenger is en route to corporate." She called it in midair. Charles stumbled back into the conference room. His voice cracked as he spoke. "Gentlemen, we'll have to reschedule." The investors stared, confused. Charles didn't wait for questions. He was already dialing his legal team, then PR, then HR. Every call came back with more bad news. The internal system was locked. Carter's team had restricted access. IT had been instructed to log every communication. Within minutes, the executive staff's email access was revoked. The COO couldn't log into scheduling. The VP of Communications was cut off from media channels. And Charles? He was still trying to figure out who Ariana Monroe even was. But he was about to find out. Not through a meeting. Not through a scheduled introduction. But through a full-scale corporate shutdown. The kind that starts with a slap and ends with the CEO watching his empire unravel from the inside. By 4 p.m., every senior executive at Skylane Air had been summoned to a mandatory emergency video call. No one knew exactly what it was about. There were rumors. Whispers of an onboard incident. Something about a passenger in first class. Something about Helix Capital triggering their control rights. But no one knew the full story, yet. The screen flickered to life. 12 boxes filled with faces. The CEO, the COO, heads of HR, legal, operations, and public relations. Some were in suits. Some had clearly been pulled from dinner. Everyone looked tense. One box, however, remained black. Labeled only, Carter & Rowe, LLP. Then, without warning, it activated. William Carter appeared on screen. No greeting. No small talk. Just a stare that could carve marble. "Good afternoon," he said, his voice smooth, calculated. "You are here because of an incident that occurred less than 4 hours ago on Flight 227. An incident involving a direct physical assault on the majority shareholder of Skylane Air." Silence. A few faces went pale. Charles Whitaker leaned forward. "William, we're just now hearing about this. We haven't." "You've heard enough," Carter interrupted. "Allow me to fill in the gaps." With one click, Carter shared his screen. What followed was raw, uncut video. The slap. The gasp. The murmurs. The unmistakable look of disbelief on Ariana Monroe's face as she turned from the strike and calmly walked toward the front of the plane. The silence in the Zoom call became suffocating. This footage was recorded by a passenger, Carter said. Several others submitted statements within an hour of landing. All align. Your lead flight attendant, Grace Miller, struck Ms. Monroe, unprovoked, in front of multiple witnesses. A voice broke in. But why would she? Carter didn't answer the question. Instead, he dropped the final blow. Now, he said, before we proceed any further. He clicked again. Another screen appeared. A live feed. Ariana Monroe. Seated in a minimalist office. Composed. Professional. The faint shadow of a bruise still visible on her cheek. The boardroom froze. This, Carter said, is the woman your employee assaulted. And she's the reason this company still has planes in the air. Every person on that call finally understood. This wasn't damage control. This was Judgment Day. Ariana did not raise her voice. She didn't need to. The boardroom was already holding its breath. Her tone was calm, but every word struck like a blade honed by experience and injustice. Let's not pretend this was an isolated incident, she began. Grace Miller didn't act in a vacuum. She acted in a culture that allowed her to believe she could get away with it. She paused, letting that sentence sit. Letting it hurt. I reviewed her file personally this afternoon, Ariana continued. 3 prior complaints from Black and Latino passengers. All labeled, inconclusive. All dismissed with no follow-up. 2 were buried by mid-level supervisors. 1, by your head of in-flight services. Charles Whitaker shifted in his chair. Sweat gathering at the back of his neck. She's been warned before, Ariana said, still staring into the camera. Privately. Quietly. And your system protected her. Screens lit up as executives double-checked HR logs and grievance records. One by one, the facts aligned. No one could deny them. Let me be clear, she continued. This isn't about a slap. That was just the surface. What we're talking about is a system designed to minimize complaints, to protect seniority over integrity, and to punish those who speak up. The head of HR, visibly shaken, tried to interject. We have protocols. No, Ariana cut in. You have paperwork. You have policies written for audits, not for people. She leaned slightly forward. In the last year alone, you've had 11 misconduct reports involving racial bias from onboard staff. Only 1 resulted in disciplinary action. 1. And I'm supposed to believe this is coincidence? Nobody answered. Because everyone knew it wasn't. This was about pattern. About permission. About what happens when silence is cheaper than justice. I built Helix to fix broken systems, Ariana said. Skylane Air was supposed to be one of them. But now I see, we didn't just buy a broken company. We bought its rot. That line landed harder than any headline could. And as the call continued, Ariana wasn't just pointing fingers. She was pulling the entire foundation apart, brick by brick. Because what got her slapped wasn't her attitude. It was her existence. And that she was never going to let slide. By the following morning, Grace Miller's termination was public. The press release was short, direct, and unapologetically clear. Following a verified incident of physical assault against a passenger, flight attendant Grace Miller has been terminated for gross misconduct, with all benefits forfeited under Skylane's conduct clause. But that was just the beginning. Ariana wasn't interested in symbols. She wanted systems. So she started where the damage had started, inside. Within 72 hours, Helix Aviation Capital appointed a new chief culture officer, Dr. Lena Price, a former federal mediator and expert on bias in corporate environments. Her mission was simple. Dismantle the silence that protected discrimination. Under Ariana's orders, Skylane launched the Mirror Initiative, a full-scale internal reform that touched every department. Every employee, from pilots to desk agents, was now required to undergo new equity and ethics training. Not the standard check-the-box slideshow, but immersive simulations, in-person dialogues, and real-world accountability reviews. The slap was part of the case study. They watched it. They analyzed it. Not to shame, but to understand. Why no one stopped it. Why it was allowed to happen. And why silence had become standard procedure. Ariana also introduced a new protection policy called the Clear Skies Protocol. It guaranteed any employee who reported abuse, bias, or retaliation would be routed to a third-party committee, outside of their chain of command. Reports were reviewed independently, anonymously, and fast. The change was immediate. Within days, employees began speaking up about subtle microaggressions, about managers who dismissed complaints, about long-ignored patterns. For the first time, they believed someone was actually listening. And Ariana made sure of that. She met with team leads personally. Not through email. Not through PR. But face-to-face. She listened. She asked questions. And she made sure that from now on, first class wouldn't just mean leather seats and champagne. It would mean accountability, dignity, safety, and respect. Ariana didn't just fire a bad employee. She rewrote the DNA of the airline. Not because of revenge, but because she knew what it meant to walk into a room where people had already decided who you were. And she refused to let that continue, not at 38,000 feet, not at ground level, not ever again. 3 months later, Ariana Monroe boarded another Skylane flight. This time, it was from Atlanta to Seattle, a mid-morning leg with light traffic in the skies. She wore the same soft gray hoodie, the same clean white sneakers. Nothing had changed about her style, but everything else had. She was greeted at the gate not by executives, not by handlers, but by a young gate agent with a warm, natural smile. "Good morning, Ms. Monroe," he said. "Welcome aboard. We're honored to have you with us today." No fanfare, just respect. Inside the aircraft, seat 1A was waiting. Clean, quiet, perfect. She sat down, powered on her tablet, and glanced out the window. The engines hadn't started yet, but the transformation already had. A new crew passed through the aisle. Collected, confident in a way that didn't come from fear, but from training, from clarity, from purpose. A few minutes in, a flight attendant approached. "Yeah. Sharp. Name tag. Tiana Ramirez." "Welcome aboard, Ms. Monroe," she said gently. "Can I offer you a pre-departure drink? Sparkling water with lemon, perhaps?" Ariana looked up, surprised. Tiana smiled. "I read your preference on file. I hope that's okay." Ariana chuckled, just a little. "That's perfect. Thank you." As Tiana walked away, Ariana scanned the cabin. It wasn't about decor or amenities. It was in the tone, the rhythm, the way passengers were seen, not scanned, heard, not handled. The DNA had changed. She had felt it the moment she stepped on. A crew that wasn't just following rules, they understood the why behind them. The kind of change that couldn't be bought with bonuses or imposed by policy alone. It had to be built. Brick by brick. Person by person. Tiana returned with the drink, placing it gently on the coaster. "If there's anything that makes you feel unsafe or overlooked, please don't hesitate to tell me. That's part of our job now." Her words were simple, but they meant everything. Ariana smiled. Not out of pride. Not from power. But from recognition. Because for the first time in a long time, she wasn't just the owner of an airline. She was a passenger. And she felt safe. There's something about flying that makes people reveal who they really are. Maybe it's the altitude. The illusion of importance that comes with boarding ahead of someone else. Maybe it's the way people believe a ticket price buys them more than just space, but power. But in truth, a seat number doesn't make you more human. And skin color never made anyone less. What happened to Ariana Monroe wasn't just about a slap in first class. It was about the quiet assumptions that live inside systems, inside people. Unchecked, unspoken but always present. Grace Miller didn't see Ariana as a CEO. She didn't see her as an owner, a founder, a leader. She didn't see her at all. She saw what she wanted to see. A young black woman in a hoodie. In seat 1A. And she made a decision that cost her everything. This story isn't just about justice. It's about clarity. Because when someone tells you, through their actions or their silence, who they think you are, you have a choice. You can let it define you. Or you can define the moment. Ariana didn't respond with rage. She responded with structure. With precision. With systems that exposed rot and rebuilt integrity. She didn't destroy Skylane. She rebuilt it. Not because of ego, but because she refused to accept that skin or status should ever determine worth. That's the core of this black story. One woman's refusal to be silent. One company forced to confront its reflection. And now, one industry watching what true accountability looks like at 38,000 feet. So the next time you see someone in a seat you think they don't belong in, pause. Ask yourself, is it the seat that bothers you? Or what you assume about the person in it? Because here's the truth. You never really know who's sitting next to you. You never really know who owns the sky. If this story moved you, inspired you, or made you think twice, share it. Leave a comment below. Have you ever been underestimated? Judged too soon? Let's talk about it. Because conversations like this, they change more than companies. They change people. And sometimes, that's where the real takeoff begins.